We haven't had any player moves to analyze Buster Posey as president of baseball operations, but he has hired some people, and these latest hirings, including Bobby Evans, who was the GM right before he was fired, and they hired Farhan Zaidi. He's back, and so are the Giants moving backwards to move ahead? Is it going to work?
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, been hosting this show since the start of the 2019 season, and I'm a lifelong Giants fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, so check us out there if you have not already, and please hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you're following the show. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. And coming up on today's show, the Giants made a couple of significant hires being reported on today by ESPN's Jeff Passan, bringing back Bobby Evans most notably, but also hiring Jeff Berry, Buster Posey's former agent at CAA Sports. These two, Evans and Berry, being hired by the Giants in advisory roles. And so, like I said, we haven't had any player decisions to analyze Buster Posey as president of baseball operations, but he has hired a GM. He's hired Randy Winn as the vice president of player development, and now Bobby Evans and Jeff Berry hired in advisory roles. And so we'll talk about Randy Winn later on today and that hire, which we haven't done yet. But, at least with Winn and with Evans, what I'm seeing from this is a movement towards the past. And it makes me honestly a little bit uneasy to see a movement toward the past, because look, it's a little bit there's a little bit of internal conflict for me, because Bobby Evans was a part of the front office that put together 3 World Series championship teams, and period, end of discussion. So he's got that on his resume. But at the same time, Bobby Evans was elevated to general manager in 2015. And, we saw things like the trade of Matt Duffy. Matt Duffy ended up not having a great career, but it was a trade that kind of stung fans, I think, at the time. And the team kind of tanked after that. And they did get Matt Moore, who pitched a heck of a game 4 in the playoffs before the bullpen blew things. But anyway, Bobby Evans as general manager of the Giants, they made some bad decisions. They signed Denard Span and Jeff Samardzija and Johnny Cueto to these kind of significant long-term deals. They traded for Evan Longoria and that 5-year commitment that they made to him. And they traded Brian Reynolds to the Pirates. And when I say I'm talking about Bobby Evans. They traded Brian Reynolds, who's gone on to become a star player with the Pirates, for 1 season of Andrew McCutchen, which, didn't work out either. And so you look at the World Championship teams, but you also I'll point out that even though they won 3 championships, they didn't make the playoffs in 2011, 2013, 2015. So they won in 10, 12. Like, it's not like they were a perennial 90 plus win team, right? They did have 90 plus wins in 2 of the championship years, and I think 88 in one of them. They were wild card teams. They were a wild card team once in the championship run, and then they were a wild card team in 2016 as well. But so there were good things, but there were also not so good things. And I will point out Bobby Evans had, since he was fired, which happened in late 2018, in like September 2018, and then they hired Farhan Zaidi. He has MLB Trade Rumors. I remember this, like, that he's interviewed for a bunch of positions. He reportedly interviewed for the Astros GM jobs on 2 occasions in 2020 and 2023. Sat down with the Angels before they hired Perry Manassian in November 2020, and that's the Giants' new GM's brother, by the way. And he was floated as a candidate for the GM job in San Francisco this offseason. I don't know who exactly floated that. But anyway, so he wasn't hired. Like, he's been out of work since he was fired, as far as I understand. I mean, as far as I know, he wasn't serving in any. I think he was doing some things in the community that were baseball related. I'm not entirely sure what he's been up to, but he's not been running teams, right? And so all I'm saying is the track record of the downfall of the Giants kind of lands on him, and the fact that Farhan Zaidi inherited such a mess. It was the mess that Evans was ultimately the one in charge of. They made decisions as a group, yes, but at the end of the day, like, just like Zaidi gets blamed for the last 6 years not working out, Evans kind of takes the blame for 2017, 18. I guess, they did make the playoffs in 2016, and I don't know, but they really ended up in a bad situation by the time he left, and that's why he was fired. So anyway, I'm not trying to just completely rain on this parade. I think, I'm sure, like I said, Evans played a role in the good things that the Giants did. But the game has also changed so much since the early 2010s. Like, the game is so different, and the way you analyze players is so different. And so, I don't know. And then Jeff Barry, I kind of have a different opinion on this. I think it's really wise to get an agent as an advisor when you have no experience working out contracts, and to have a former agent on your payroll as an advisor is really going to help you when it comes to working with other agents and trying to sign free agents, essentially, because obviously Jeff Barry knows how agents think, knows how teams think, knows how the whole process works, and it's brand new to Buster Posey. So, anyway, MLB Trade Rumor says Barry worked at CAA for more than 2 decades, becoming one of baseball's most high-profile agents in the process. He stepped away from the job at the beginning of the 2024 season, and Barry's former CAA colleague was Brody Van Wagenen, who was the Mets GM from 2018 to 20. So I remember that. That didn't go well either. But it's not like the Giants are hiring Jeff Barry to be their GM or president of baseball operations. But as an advisor, I think it's fine. And I also think Bobby Evans is fine. I'm not going to make an assessment of everything until we start seeing player moves. We just haven't seen them yet. And so this is all we have to go by. But to me, with Evans, and then we'll get into Randy Winn as well, it's kind of, instead of like forward looking, it's kind of past looking in order to move forward. And the question is, will it work? And the answer for me is that I don't know. So anyway, we will get into the decision to hire Randy Winn as the vice president of player development. We'll get quotes from Randy Winn and Buster Posey, all of that coming up in just a minute. And before we get into it, today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you in part by Game Time. I love the atmosphere of heading to a Warriors game. Who doesn't? Whether it was at the old place or the new place, it's electric. And Game Time makes buying tickets a breeze. And, you know, the last thing I need is to be stressed out trying to buy tickets to go have some fun. And you've got images of seat views, which is important because, you know, for me, when I'm heading to a venue that I haven't been to much, which is true of the Chase Center, I want to see, like, what does the angle look like? A two-dimensional map, it's not going to cut it. But with Game Time, you get panoramic views from your seats, and also the Game Time guarantee, which means if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. All right, here we go. We're going to get into the Giants hiring Randy Winn as vice president of player development. Once again, this is a move that, you know, it's a big role, and Randy Winn has a lot of experience. I'm not saying that he doesn't. Like, he's done a lot. I actually wasn't even aware of how we see him on TV as a post-game analyst, pre and post. And I think he does a good job of that. But, you know, we can learn something. I've learned about him and his philosophies on baseball over the years by watching him on pre and post game shows. And so I don't know exactly how it's going to be tough to gauge his job performance. And I think, you know, for a while is what I'm trying to say, just like anybody who comes into such a role. But again, I think it's kind of a step backwards. And I mean that. I want to be careful to underscore that I don't necessarily mean that it's going to fail. I just mean Randy Winn was a part of the past, you know, and he is elevated. It's similar to Buster Posey in a way, in that he kind of leapfrogs people who would normally be considered for these positions, I think, and goes into the top role. I mean, vice president. I don't know that they have there's some of these roles that are like vice president of X, and I don't understand because there doesn't seem to be a president of X. So I don't quite understand that. But from what I read about this, the role is more in the same vein as what Buster Posey intends to do, which is to be like a visionary and to set the tone and to kind of set the agenda, as opposed to like boots on the ground, like in the trenches doing the things. It's more of a philosophical, obviously more than just philosophy, but like having a philosophy and then making sure that it's implemented. And that's, I think, Buster Posey is more of that role as well, which is unusual for a president of baseball operations. So, I've made that point. I don't think it's controversial. It's just really kind of unprecedented. And Randy Winn, being the vice president of player development, it's a little bit similar. And so Randy Winn said, let's see, a Winn opened. Excuse me, not opened. There, according to Shayna Rubin of the San Francisco Chronicle, by the way, Randy Winn interviewed for the general manager position after Buster Posey was hired as president of baseball operations. Job eventually went to Zach Manassian. Posey kept the door open for Winn to take a job in player development. They had extensive conversations about the team's farm system. And so we're going to get some clues about how Randy Winn sees player development here. So Winn said in a phone conversation with Ruben, quote, "I think we," being he and Buster, "share a passion for not only player development, but this organization, having both played here. For me," Randy Winn says, "it's a little different having grown up in the area and the Bay Area being my home. I think we both share a passion for this organization and wanting this organization to be great." And so, again, kind of vague there, but Winn was a special assistant to former general manager Bobby Evans. So again, connecting the dots here, we're like bringing the band back together in a sense. He worked for Bobby Evans, and now Evans is back in the organization. But also Randy Winn worked alongside Manassian, who's now the Giants general manager, as a pro scout in 2019. So it says in 2019. I guess that he didn't continue in that role. I thought that he was still doing things within the organization, not just pre and post game shows. But Randy Winn said that from that experience, once I got the taste for that, I was like, you know what? This is something I could see myself doing. And so he continues to say, "I'm really excited for the opportunity because if you've heard Buster talk, he talks a lot about wanting to build the farm system and expectations for Giants players and young players and what that means to be a Giant. I find all of that really exciting, and I think we are very aligned on a lot of the principles of player development in terms of fundamentals and expectations." Now, Posey said, we are excited to see Randy in this new role. Randy is part of the Bay Area's rich baseball history and brings a deep knowledge and understanding of the game from his playing and post-playing career. He has also been dedicated to serving the youth of our community through his work and leadership with the Giants Community Fund, and we feel Randy is the right person to take our player development to the next level. And so from sfgiants.com, with Maria Guardado doing the writing, I'm just trying to see if there was anything else in particular that came out. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I've heard Randy Winn a lot on the pre and post game show on the Giants on TV, and when I hear what Posey said about basically his like OPS versus RBIs thing, and then what I've heard Randy Winn say, it's more, I don't want to put people in a box, but it's more kind of an old school mentality. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe the game has gone too far in one direction, and when everyone is zigging, you want to zag. But it also feels like going to what was the game's philosophy prior to the modern era. And, we're talking about stuff like the total opposite, I think, philosophically of what Farhan Zaidi and Gabe Kapler brought in. And I don't know if in reality they're going to hold on to the good things about the Farhan Zaidi and Gabe Kapler. When I say Gabe Kapler, I really mean the coaching staff that he brought in, like the hitting coaches, which, by the way, it's worth noting that Justin Veely and Pedro Guerrero left, even though they were invited back and had another year on their contract. So to me, it a little bit speaks to the Giants possibly telling them, look, we're going to go a different direction philosophically from like a hitting standpoint, for example, because philosophically, the Giants changed their hitting philosophy to be basically don't swing. Like Gabe Gabe Kapler said that Brandon Belt was exactly what they wanted their hitters to be like. And that was just perfect because Brandon Belt was the most polarizing player out there for the Giants for the longest time because he aggravated people with his like taking called third strikes basically and then looking demoralized as he walked back to the dugout. But they're like, why don't you protect the zone? Why don't you basically the Belt's philosophy was, I have a happy zone and I'm just not going to swing unless it's in that zone. And that's what the Giants wanted their players to do. And it worked really well in 2020 and 2021. And it didn't bear fruit really at all after that. So I'm not here saying that's the right philosophy because the hitting kind of fell apart in the last several seasons. So, I'm not saying something doesn't need to change. And it was very frustrating to watch. I mean, I watch every game and believe me, I know a lot of you do too. And these last 3 years, 2022, 3 and 4, were hard to watch. I mean, we're talking like 400 and something games. What's 162 times 3? 486 games of just tough to watch in general baseball. And so anyway, I'm not saying like, no, you got to hold on to the stuff they've been doing because the stuff they've been doing didn't work. That's why Farhan Zaidi was fired. But with Randy Winn, I think he, like what he says, I'm aligned. He's like, if you listen to Buster, we're very aligned on what we think about these things and what they think about these things. Posey, I think what he's referencing is, the comments about Buster Posey said, and I think don't take him literally because he was just speaking in an interview and didn't have time to think about the exact numbers he was throwing out there. But he said, these days players are rewarded for something like OPS and not RBIs. And so where's the incentive to drive in runs? And then Posey says, I think it's important to drive in runs. Obviously, everybody agrees it's important to drive in runs. Nobody's saying it's not. And Posey knows that. But what Posey is saying is that RBIs are like considered in the modern, front office as kind of random and contextual. Like there has to be guys on base to drive in runs. And so the player at the plate doesn't have any effect on whether or not there are guys on base. That's kind of why the RBI has been devalued. And I think rightfully so, but maybe we went too far. And Posey said you've got a guy, I think he said with a 850 OPS, but he only drives in 40 runs versus a guy with a 770 OPS, but he drives in 80 runs. And he's like, we want the guy with the 770 OPS who drives in 80 runs. That's essentially what he was saying. But those were extreme examples. And I believe a piece was even written on this and how, there's only been like one time where a player had a 850 OPS and drove in 40 or fewer runs. So again, I'm not taking him at his literal word on these numbers, but philosophically, I think that goes a little bit far in the other direction. And so we shall see. Again, I'm going to judge this based on the moves they make and the performance on the field. I'm not going to sit here and make grand, statements analyzing how this is going to go without seeing how this is going to go. And I'm not trying to, I don't know how Randy Winn will do in this role. I have no idea. He could be the best vice president of player development ever, but it's definitely a departure from what they've been doing the last 6 years and more of a going back to what they were doing before that. And the question is, can that work in the modern game? Or are they going to be careful to take what works from the modern game, but also bring back a little bit of what worked in the game before it was super modernized and then have that be the way forward? Like, that's the question for me. Will it work? And I think that's the goal. I mean, Posey keeps getting asked about analytics, and he's like, look, we're using analytics. If you don't use analytics, like, you're out of your mind. Like if you think a team can just not use them, there's obviously a place for it. But my question is, how far are they going to shy away from that stuff and move back to more old school stuff? So anyway, coming up in just a minute, we're going to shift our attention to a couple of major deadlines, including one today and then one coming up in a couple of days. And then things are really going to kick off. The winter meetings are around the corner. So we'll get into all of that in just a minute. And before we do, today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you in part by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just head on over to FanDuel.com. I would pick the most kind of favorable, lopsided action I can find, place that $5 bet, and hope to come away with $150 in bonus bets. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, here we go. We're going to switch gears. Some have said on Twitter or X, whatever it's called now, that I've been negative about Buster Posey being the president of baseball operations. I hope that this doesn't come across as negative, like any of this. I'm totally withholding judgment on all of these things, and it all comes down to performance on the field over the long haul. You know, I said this about Farhan Zaidi, and I'll say it about Posey and all the people that he hires, that, well, you know, it's going to take years to really, especially when it comes to player development, to really see if this is working or not. And so I'm just saying it like I see it, and I'm not saying this is a disaster, this is a total blah blah blah. This is just my opinion. I am, like I say, data driven and rational. I kind of was upset with how they were running things when Evans ended up being fired, and so I was happy they were going another direction. Never happy to see someone fired, but you know, I thought that, you know, I wanted the Giants to be more like the Dodgers, winning 100 games every year. I know they haven't had a ton of postseason success, but they did just win the World Series, and they're just extremely good every year. That's all I want the Giants to be. And again, even when the Giants were winning championships, they weren't even above 500 in the years in between. And so I'll take the championships, no doubt, but you know, I'd like them to just be a consistent 90+ win team. That's what I want for this team. And if you get in the playoffs, anything can happen. And I think that's what happened with the Giants. It was kind of an anything can happen. In 2012, they won 6 elimination games. I mean, what are the odds that you're going to win all 6 elimination games? If you replay that universe a bunch of times, like, it's a rare circumstance that you're going to win all 6 elimination games. So there's some element of fortune involved in winning a World Series title, in my opinion. So that's just my opinion. You can disagree all you want. That's fine. Anyway, these deadlines. Today is the deadline to add players to the 40-man roster to protect them from the Rule 5 draft. And so as of this recording, there haven't been any Giants moves. We've seen other teams make some moves in this regard. Giants' 40-man roster is full right now, as far as I can tell, because they also have to add players back off the 60-day injured list. And also today is the day when players must decide on the qualifying offer. There were no Giants who were given the qualifying offer. There were no tough calls at all in that regard. There have been in recent years. But anyway, I don't know if it's full because maybe they made some moves here, or if it's just already full. But if it's already full, which it appears it is, the Giants would have to DFA some people to make room to add players who are not on the 40-man but are eligible to be taken in the Rule 5 draft if they want to protect them from the Rule 5 draft. And so I'm not the number one authority on who exactly they should and will protect, but that deadline is today. And so it's a little bit later on today. And so tomorrow, I think, or at some point this week, we will be breaking down what they do in that regard. But also, you've got another major deadline coming up on November 22nd, which is, as my mouse decides to not work, November 22nd is this Friday, and that is the tender/non-tender deadline, and that's a big one. And the Giants have some decisions to make with Mike Yastrzemski, Lamont Way Jr., Tyler Rogers, and Camilo Doval arbitration eligible. Also, Austin Warren, he could be a DFA candidate because they're gonna need to clear a spot, and I don't know that I don't know that he's gonna be someone that they want to pay arbitration type salary to. Anyway, that's gonna be coming up on Friday, and it's important to note what the projected salaries are of these players via the arbitration process. Mike Yastrzemski projected to be able to make, about $9.5 million if it goes to arbitration. These often get settled. Under Farhan Zaidi, they very often reached contract agreements with like salaries for 2020 or for the upcoming season prior to the deadline, like at the deadline. So we don't know how it's going to go with Buster Posey, because you don't have to reach a number yet. All you have to say is, yes, we tender you a contract, and then later you have until like January, February to figure out what their actual salary is, and it can go to an arbitration hearing. That's kind of the final step if you're unable to come to an agreement before then. So that will be, in all likelihood, unless they sign somebody before then, our first indication of player moves. That and this deadline to add players to the 40-man. We'll see which young players they value in terms of who, if anyone, they add to their 40-man to protect them from being taken in the Rule 5 draft. So we'll break that down later in the week, and we'll get you set for the tender deadline as well. That is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB. Baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter or X at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out so much, so thank you in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. Can't wait to be with you again later on this week. Thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.